the Warden of broken realms. They crossed the veil between worlds and unleashed hell on Earth. A lone operative with a silenced rifle. A hunter with a bow. A dying mage who never should have existed. Time is breaking, reality is bleeding, and something ancient is coming through the cracks. One shot changed everything. Now there's no going back. Watch as history unravels. And only the dead know why. Chapter 1. The Breach. Report to the High Warden of the Order of Continuum Wardens. Department of Antiquities, Western Sector, Britannia. Division to the esteemed High Warden of the Order of Continuum Wardens. Report on unauthorized continuum breach. Sirs, yesterday at 5:21 in the evening, Greenwich Standard, our monitoring array, designated FRI 456 VB5, detected an unauthorized breach through the boundaries of the primary continuum. Preliminary analysis indicates an 87% probability that this intrusion is anomalous, bearing no direct relation to our current reality. A deeper expedited analysis further suggests, with a 93.5% likelihood, that the breach originated from the Shadow Veil, a realm of probabilistic worlds where advanced PSI capabilities are a tangible reality. The findings of this expedited analysis have been forwarded to the Analytical Division with an urgent designation. A temporary analytical task force, convened to address this matter, has concluded that an inhabitant of the probabilistic worlds, a potent PSI wielder, has infiltrated the primary continuum. Based on the breach's entry point and timing, there is an approximate 70% probability that the intruder's objective is to aid a group of Briton warlords, led by the High Chieftain Branwyn, who are currently pursued by the cavalry of the Orion Empire's General Cassian. Such interference could precipitate an unpredictable drift in the fabric of our reality. It is worth noting that the historical defeat of Branwyn's coalition, as recorded in the primary continuum, shaped the continuum's structure for decades thereafter. At 9:32 in the evening, Greenwich Standard, a significant surge of PSI energy was detected, classified by our analysts as the deployment of combat-oriented PSI applications, commonly referred to as battle magic. The energy surge was localized within 2.35 seconds, with an 89% probability linking it to Branwyn's warband. Consequently, the Analytical Task Force asserts that destructive interference with the continuum has already occurred, and we anticipate elastic alterations to reality within 5 to 7 local days. A dissenting opinion from Deputy Chief Analyst, Professor Alexander Kane, suggests that failure to neutralize the intrusion's effects within 3 to 4 local days could trigger catastrophic consequences by the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. Kane posits a 99.5% likelihood that such changes would prevent the Orion Empire's expansion into regions like Egyptus or Judea, potentially erasing the rise of the dominant Western faith. Note from Task Force leader, Professor Peter McRoyce. Kane's obsession with religious history is clouding his judgment. Recommend his reassignment to archival duties to curb his alarmist tendencies. In light of the above, the Order of Continuum Wardens urgently recommends a surgical operation under Protocol AN-23, mandating the immediate elimination of the intruder and the recalibration of affected individuals' fates to align with the primary continuum's baseline. Post-operation, all relevant materials will be transferred to the Investigative Division to identify the orchestrators of this breach from the probabilistic worlds, though this task is deemed secondary to stabilizing the current reality. Resolution of the High Warden of the Order of Continuum Wardens. I authorize the operation under Protocol AN-23. Deploy a single operative, with equipment sourced from the years 2000 to 2006. The operative's return is considered a secondary priority. Professor Alexander Kane is to be reassigned to archival duties with a formal reprimand for fostering panic. Chapter 2. The Unseen Slayer. The forest was a cacophony of silence, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves under Arik's cautious steps. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the acrid tang of blood, still fresh from the mage's demise. Arik crouched low, his hunter's instincts honed by years under Elder Torvin's tutelage, his eyes scanning the underbrush. The mage's body lay sprawled on the clearing's edge, a grim testament to the unseen force that had struck. A neat, black hole marred the center of the mage's forehead, a grotesque contrast to the shattered ruin of his skull's rear. Blood pooled in the grass, catching the fading sunlight in a sickly sheen. Branwen, the high chieftain, stood over the corpse, his weathered face a mask of confusion and rage. "What manner of sorcery is this?" he growled, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. His broad shoulders tensed, his hand gripping the hilt of his iron sword. "No arrow could do this. No spear." "It's no sorcery," Arik muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, his sharp ears catching a faint foreign sound. A soft pop, like a wineskin uncorked, distant and fleeting. He dropped to the ground, pressing his ear to the earth, but the sound was gone. His fingers brushed the fletching of an arrow in his quiver, reassuring himself of its weight. Something struck him, something unnatural. Garin, Branwen's shield-bearer, staggered back, his face a crimson mess from the mage's blood. He wiped at it with trembling hands, smearing it across his tunic. "Gods preserve us," he choked, his voice thick with shock. "His head, it's gone, half of it. What could—" "Enough," Branwen snapped, his eyes darting to the surrounding trees. "We're exposed here. Whoever did this is still out there." He turned to the others. A handful of Briton warriors, their faces pale, some clutching weapons, others frozen in horror. One knelt beside the mage, futilely pressing hands to the lifeless form, as if will alone could undo the wound. Arik's gaze flicked to the kneeling warrior, a young lad named Cillian, barely 16 winters old. The boy's hands shook, his breath hitching as he stared at the mage's ruined skull. "He's gone," Cillian whispered, his voice breaking. "He was supposed to protect us. How do we fight this?" "We don't," Arik said sharply, rising to his feet. "Not yet. We need to know what we're facing." His heart pounded, but he forced his voice steady. The mage had been their strength. His PSI, battle magic, as the elders called it, had turned Orion cavalry to ash just days ago. Yet now he lay dead, felled by a force that defied comprehension. Arik had seen wounds before. The jagged tears of boar tusks, the clean cuts of swords. This was different. The precision of the entry wound, the catastrophic exit, it spoke of a weapon beyond their world. Branwen's eyes met Arik's, hard and unyielding. "You're the hunter, Arik. Find the trail. Find whatever did this." Arik nodded, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. "Stay here. Keep the men together." He slipped into the underbrush, moving with the grace of a fox, his leather boots silent on the forest floor. The clearing faded behind him as he circled outward, his senses straining. The mage's death replayed in his mind. The black streak, too fast to see. The sudden collapse. Whatever had killed him was no spirit, no beast. It was calculated, deliberate. He completed a wide loop, 50 paces from the clearing, marked by a fallen oak, its gnarled roots clawing at the sky. Nothing. No tracks, no broken twigs. He pushed deeper, his nose twitching at a faint, unfamiliar scent, sharp, like burnt metal mixed with decay. It grew stronger as he moved east, carried on a gentle breeze. His stomach churned, not from fear, but from the alien nature of the odor. It wasn't the musk of a predator or the rot of a corpse. It was wrong. At 300 paces, the smell became unbearable, stinging his hunter's nose, sharper than a hound's. He crouched, his fingers brushing the grass until they closed around something small and hard. He lifted it, squinting in the dim light. A metal cylinder, no longer than his finger, green with a lacquered sheen, its base heavy and etched with tiny, precise symbols. The top tapered like an amphora's neck, the bottom dented, revealing a glint of yellow beneath the green. He sniffed it and recoiled, the acrid stench searing his nostrils. This was it, the thing that had killed the mage. He wrapped it in a strip of rawhide from his pouch, tucking it away. Arik glanced back toward the clearing, now 500 paces distant. The figures of Branwen and his men were mere shadows against the firelight. No arrow could travel this far, not with such precision. He scanned the ground, his eyes catching faint impressions in the soil, boot prints, shallow but deliberate, unlike the heavy tread of Orion legionaries. Someone had been here, watching, waiting. "Who are you?" Arik whispered to the empty forest, his voice swallowed by the trees. The weight of the cylinder in his pouch felt like a curse, a fragment of a world he couldn't comprehend. He moved again, silent as a wraith, circling back toward the clearing. The killer was out there, and Arik knew one thing for certain. They weren't done. Chapter 3. The Warden's Blade. In the sterile glow of the Order of Continuum Warden's command chamber, buried deep beneath the cliffs of Tintagel, Trajan adjusted the straps of their field gear, the weight of the equipment familiar yet oppressive. The chamber hummed with the faint vibration of Continuum monitors, their screens casting an eerie blue light across the stone walls. Trajan's reflection flickered in the polished surface of a nearby console. A lean figure, face obscured by streaks of green and brown paint, eyes sharp and unyielding. The Leshy 3 camouflage suit clung to their frame, its fabric woven with synthetic fibers that mimicked moss and bark, designed to render them a ghost in any forest. "Agent Trajan," came a voice, crisp and authoritative, from the chamber's center. Commander Alara Voss, head of the Western Sector's Tactical Division, stood with arms crossed, her gray hair pulled tight in a bun. "The High Warden's orders are clear. Protocol AN-23. Eliminate the intruder, stabilize the continuum, no deviations." Trajan nodded, checking the Remington M700 rifle slung across their back. The weapon, a relic from 1987, felt heavy with purpose, its silencer and third-generation night vision scope meticulously calibrated. "Understood, Commander. Target is a PSI wielder from the Shadow Veil. High threat level. Expected resistance?" Voss's lips tightened. "The intruders already disrupted the continuum. Our analysts confirm a PSI surge linked to Branwen's warband. You'll be operating in a hot zone. Briton warriors, possibly PSI enhanced, and an unstable temporal fabric. Expect chaos." Trajan's fingers brushed the Colt 1911 pistol at their hip, its 1978 frame cold against their palm. 50 rounds for the rifle, 42 for the pistol, plus explosives and signal mines. A 3-day survival kit for a mission where return was secondary. "Chaos is my specialty," Trajan said, their voice low, almost a growl. "But the time frame, 5 to 7 days for elastic changes. Tight window." "Too tight," Voss agreed, her eyes narrowing. "Professor McCroyce's team is screaming about a potential cascade by the 1st century. Kane's report was unhinged, but he's not entirely wrong. If the intruder shifts Branwen's fate, the Orion Empire's campaigns could unravel. No Egyptus, no Judea, no foundation for the West's dominant faith. The continuum would fracture." Trajan snorted, adjusting the night vision binoculars strapped to their chest. "Kane's always chasing doomsday. Still, a fractured continuum means more work for us. What's the intruder's profile?" Voss tapped a console, pulling up a holographic display of fluctuating data streams. "Male, mid-30s. Probable origin. Shadow Veil's Alpha 7 strand. PSI capabilities include kinetic manipulation and localized energy bursts. Battle magic, as the locals call it. He's likely embedded with Branwen's warband, posing as their mage. Point of entry, a forest near the Tamar River, yesterday at dawn." "Explains the PSI surge," Trajan mused, their mind already mapping the terrain. The Tamar's dense woodlands were perfect for an ambush, or for hiding. "Any allies?" "Unclear," Voss replied. Branwen's group is small, 10 to 12 warriors, maybe fewer after the Orion pursuit. Assume they're all hostile. The intruder's PSI could amplify their combat effectiveness. You're authorized to neutralize any threats to the continuum. Trajan's jaw tightened. Neutralizing a single target was clean. Wiping out a warband was messier, especially with PSI in play. They'd seen what battle magic could do. Entire cohorts reduced to ash, timelines warped by a single reckless spell. And the locals, Branwen's people? Collateral, Voss said coldly. Their fates are secondary to the continuum's stability. Recalibrate their paths, if possible, but don't risk the mission. The High Warden was explicit. One operative, no support, no trace. Trajan's eyes flicked to the continuum capsule in the chamber's corner. A sleek obsidian pod, its surface etched with temporal runes. A one-way ticket to the breach point, designed to dissolve after use. No trace, they echoed, a bitter edge to their voice. The Order didn't expect them back. Heroes of reality didn't get parades, they got archives and posthumous medals. You have doubts? Voss asked, her tone sharp, probing. Trajan met her gaze unflinching. No doubts, Commander. Just clarity. I go in, I eliminate the target, I patch the continuum. If I don't come back, you'll write a nice report for the archives. Voss's expression softened. Just a fraction. You're the best we have, Trajan. That's why it's you. The capsule's primed for the Tamar, dawn yesterday. Gears biodegradable. 450 years, it's dust. Ammunition's rigged to lose potency in 42 hours. You're a ghost, start to finish. Always am, Trajan said, slinging the rifle's strap tighter. They stepped toward the capsule, its hatch hissing open. Any last words? Don't underestimate the intruder, Voss warned. PSI wielders from the Shadow Veil don't play by our rules. They're desperate, Trajan. Desperate people do reckless things. Trajan smirked, stepping into the capsule. So do I, Commander. So do I. The hatch sealed, and the chamber filled with a low hum as the capsule's temporal engines activated. Trajan closed their eyes, the world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The Tamar River, a forest crawling with Briton warriors, and a PSI wielder who'd already torn a hole in reality. This wasn't a mission, it was a hunt. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Trail. The forest pressed in around Arik, its shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Tamar Valley in hues of amber and ash. His breath came in shallow bursts, each inhale laced with the sharp alien stench of the metal cylinder tucked in his pouch. The weight of it felt like a lodestone, pulling him toward an unseen enemy. He moved with the silence of a wraith, his boots gliding over moss and root, every step a lesson learned from Elder Torvin's grueling tutelage. The forest is your shield, boy, Torvin had growled years ago, his weathered hands guiding Arik's young fingers to track a deer through bramble. But it's also your enemy's. Learn its secrets, or it'll betray you. Arik's eyes darted across the underbrush, catching faint signs, a snapped twig, a scuff in the earth, too deliberate for a beast. The operative, whatever they were, had been here, their trail a whisper in the forest's cacophony. Arik's heart thudded, not from exertion, but from the memory of the mage's ruined skull, the precise hole between his eyes. No Briton weapon could do that. No Orion's spear, either. This was something else, something that chilled him more than the winter winds of his childhood. He paused, crouching behind a gnarled yew, its branches heavy with the weight of centuries. The air carried that strange, burnt metal scent again, faint but unmistakable. His mind flickered back to a lesson with Torvin, 6 summers past, when they'd tracked a wolf pack through the Blackwood. "Smell the air, Arik," Torvin had said, his voice rough as gravel. "Every creature leaves a mark, not just on the ground but in the wind. Find it, and you find them." Arik had been 12, his hands raw from bowstring burns, his nose untrained. Now, at 20, He could scent a hare at 50 paces. But this scent, this was no hare, no wolf. It was wrong, like the stench of a forge mixed with death. He followed the trail, moving in a wide arc, his short hunting bow half drawn, an arrow nocked. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl. But beneath it, he heard something else, a faint, rhythmic crunch, like boots on dry grass, too careful to be careless. The operative was close. Arek's pulse quickened, his training warring with the dread pooling in his gut. Torvin's voice echoed again. "Fear's a signal, not a chain. Use it, or it uses you." Arek crept forward, his body low, blending with the undergrowth. The trail led to a clearing, smaller than the one where the mage had died, ringed by ancient oaks. He froze, his eyes catching a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong, green and brown, merging with the foliage. It wasn't a spirit, not one of the forest folk the elders spoke of. This was a person, cloaked in a suit that seemed to drink the light, their form almost invisible against the trees. Arek's breath caught. This was the killer. He eased back, his hand tightening on the bow. The figure crouched, inspecting something on the ground, a broken branch, perhaps, or one of Arek's own tracks. The operative's movements were precise, deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. Arek's mind raced. He could loose an arrow now, aim for the neck, end it. But the mage's death flashed before him, the speed, the precision. This enemy was no ordinary warrior. An arrow might miss, or worse, fail to kill. "Who are you?" Arek whispered, too soft for the figure to hear. He shifted, circling the clearing, keeping the oaks between them. The operative stood, their head tilting as if sensing a change in the air. Arek's heart skipped. Had they heard him? Smelled him? Torvin's lessons hadn't prepared him for this. A foe who moved like a hunter, who killed with weapons beyond imagining. The figure turned, and Arek glimpsed a face, human, but painted in streaks of green and brown, eyes sharp and searching. No beard, no moustache, unlike the Briton warriors or even the Aurian legionaries. The eyes scanned the trees, pausing where Arek hid. He held his breath, willing himself to become part of the oak, its rough bark pressing into his back. The operative's gaze lingered, then moved on. They slung a strange knotted object over their shoulder. A weapon, perhaps, though it looked like a gnarled branch bound with leather straps. Arek's fingers twitched on the bowstring. He could strike now, end the threat, but Torvin's voice cut through again. "A hunter waits, Arek. Strike too soon, and you're the prey." He exhaled slowly, forcing his hand to relax. The operative moved, slipping into the trees, their form fading like mist. Arek waited, counting 10 breaths, then followed. The trail grew fresher, crushed grass, a scuff on a root. The operative was heading east toward the river. Arek's mind churned. Why east? The Tamar's banks were treacherous, lined with reeds and mud, no place for a fight. Was the operative luring him, or fleeing? Neither felt right. This was no coward, no reckless warrior. This was a hunter, like him, but better, trained in ways Arek couldn't fathom. He stopped, crouching low, the cylinder in his pouch heavy against his thigh. He pulled it out, turning it in his fingers. The symbols on its base were sharp, angular, unlike the flowing runes of the Briton scribes. They reminded him of the Aurian standards he'd seen in battle, their letters etched in bronze. Could this be their work? A new weapon, some devilry crafted by their engineers, but why send a single warrior, cloaked like a forest spirit, when legions could march? The scent grew stronger, sharper. Arek froze, his ears catching a new sound, a soft click, like flint on steel. He dropped flat, the arrow in his hand digging into the earth. The operative was close, too close. He'd been careless, too focused on the trail. Torvin's voice rang in his ears. "The forest sees everything, Arek. Don't let it see you." He rolled behind a fallen log, his heart pounding. The operative was out there, watching, waiting. Arik was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. Chapter 5. Shadows. Multiply. The forest held its breath as Arik lay pressed against the damp earth, the fallen log shielding him from the unseen operative's gaze. His heart thundered, each beat a reminder of the cylinder in his pouch, its alien weight a silent accusation of his ignorance. The faint click he'd heard moments ago lingered in his mind, sharp and mechanical, like the strike of a smith's hammer. He strained his ears, but the forest offered only the whisper of leaves and the distant gurgle of the Tamar River. The operative was gone, or so perfectly hidden that Arik, despite his hunter's instincts, couldn't sense them. He rose cautiously, his bow still clutched tight, and scanned the trees. The burnt metal stench had faded, but a new unease gnawed at him. The forest felt wrong, as if the air itself had thickened, pressing against his skin. He'd felt this once before, 3 summers ago, when a druid's ritual had gone awry, summoning a storm that tore through the blackwood. This was no storm, but the same unnatural weight clung to the world, a warning of something breaking. Arik moved, keeping low, his steps silent as he retraced his path toward the clearing where Branwen and the others waited. He needed to warn them, to regroup, to understand what hunted them. But as he neared the clearing, a new sound stopped him, a low guttural moan, followed by a sharp cry cut short. He dropped to a crouch, his arrow nocked, and peered through the underbrush. The clearing was a slaughter. Branwen stood alone, his sword drawn, blood dripping from a gash on his forearm. Around him lay 3 of their warriors, their bodies twisted, throats torn open as if by claws. Cillian, the young lad, knelt beside one, his hands trembling as he pressed them to a wound that would never heal. "They came from nowhere," Cillian stammered, his voice breaking. "Like shadows, but wrong, not men, not beasts." Branwen's eyes met Arik's, fierce but clouded with fear. "Another attack," he growled. "Not your operative. Something else. It tore through us, then vanished." Arik's stomach twisted. Another breach? The mage's death had been precise, calculated. This was savage, chaotic. He stepped into the clearing, his gaze sweeping the carnage. The wounds weren't from blades or arrows, but from something primal, tearing flesh like a wolf pack. Yet the ground showed no tracks, no claw marks. "This isn't Orion," he said, his voice steady despite the dread coiling in his chest. "And it's not the operative's work. Something else crossed into our world." Branwen's jaw tightened. "The mage warned us," he said. The veil was thinning, that his power drew things. "We didn't listen." He gestured to the bodies. "Now we pay the price." Arik's hand brushed the cylinder in his pouch, its cold metal grounding him. "We can't stay here. The operative's still out there, and now this. We need to move, find cover by the river." Cillian looked up, his face pale. "Move? To where? They'll find us. They always find us." "Not if we're smart," Arik snapped, his voice sharper than intended. "I tracked the operative this far. I can track these things, but we need to stick together." Branwen nodded, wiping blood from his sword. "You lead, Arik. Find us a path. I'll keep the boy alive." As they gathered what remained of their gear, a rustle in the bushes made Arik spin, bow raised. A figure stumbled into the clearing, bloodied but alive. A woman, her leather armor torn, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. She held a short spear, its tip stained red. "Don't shoot," she rasped, raising a hand. "I'm with you. Name's Lyra, one of Edric's scouts." Arik lowered his bow but kept the arrow nocked. "Edric's dead. His war band was cut down by the Orions 2 days ago." Lyra's eyes hardened. "Not all of us. I escaped, tracked you here, saw the mage go down, saw the things that hit you just now." She pointed to the bodies. They're not natural. They move like smoke, strike like wolves. Branwen stepped forward, his sword still drawn. Why should we trust you? You could be one of them, or an Aurian spy. Lyra spat on the ground, her gaze unflinching. If I were Aurian, you'd be dead. If I were one of those things, you wouldn't see me coming. I want revenge, same as you. Edric was my kin. Those creatures took what was left of my people. Arik studied her, his hunter's instincts weighing her words. Her stance was steady, her eyes sharp but haunted, like a wolf that had survived a trap. You know these woods? He asked. Better than most, Lyra replied. I can guide you to the river's bend where the reeds hide a cave. Safe for now. Branwen glanced at Arik, his expression a silent question. Arik nodded. She comes, but you stay close, Lyra. One wrong move, and my arrow finds your heart. Lyra smirked, unperturbed. Fair enough, Hunter. Just don't slow me down. As they moved, Arik took the lead, Lyra at his side, her spear ready. Cillian and Branwen followed, the boy's steps unsteady, the chieftains resolute. The forest seemed to watch them, its silence heavier than before. Arik's mind raced. The operative was still out there, a ghost with a weapon that could kill from 500 paces. Now, something else stalked the woods. Creatures born of a thinning veil, drawn by the mage's power or the breach itself. He glanced at Lyra, her face set in grim determination. An ally, perhaps, but trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Keep your eyes sharp, Arik said, his voice low. The operative's human. But these new things, they're not. They don't leave tracks. Lyra's grip tightened on her spear. Then we hunt what we can't see. You ever face something like that, Hunter? Arik's mind flashed to Torvin's lessons, to nights spent tracking shadows in the Blackwood, learning to feel the forest's pulse. Not like this, he admitted. But I'll learn, or we die. Branwen grunted, a rare approval. Then learn fast, Arik, because whatever's coming, it's not waiting. Chapter 6. Fractured Bonds. The command chamber beneath Tintagel buzzed with urgency, its stone walls amplifying the hum of continuum monitors as red alerts pulsed across their screens. Commander Elara Voss stood at the central console, her face taut, her fingers gripping the edge as data streams flickered. The secondary breach had hit at 3:14 in the morning. Greenwich Standard, a jagged tear in the primary continuum detected by the FRI 456 VB5 array. The analysts, bleary-eyed and tense, scrambled to pass the data, their voices a low murmur of calculations and dread. It's not just the original intruder, said Professor Peter McRoyce, his usual composure fraying as he pointed to a holographic map of the Tamar Valley. This new breach is chaotic. Multiple entities, non-human, PSI signatures off the charts. They're not from the Shadow Veil's Alpha 7 strand. Likely a deeper layer, Beta 9 or worse. Voss's eyes narrowed. Worse? Define worse, McRoyce. McRoyce adjusted his spectacles, his voice low. Entities with no stable form. Predatory, drawn to PSI disturbances like moths to flame. The mage's death must have amplified the first breach, thinning the veil further. Now we've got a pack of them, and they're hunting. Voss's jaw tightened. Trajan's out there alone, and now this. Can we extract them? McRoyce shook his head. The capsule's gone per protocol. Trajan's gear is time-locked, 42 hours until the ammunition degrades. Extraction's not an option unless we risk a third breach, which we can't afford. Then we escalate, Voss said, her voice cold. Authorize Trajan to use all assets, explosives, mines, whatever it takes. The continuum's stability comes first. Those creatures must be contained. An analyst, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, spoke up. Commander, the entities are targeting Branwen's warband. If they're eliminated, it could stabilize the timeline naturally. Trajan might not need to engage the creatures directly. Voss's gaze hardened. And if Trajan's caught in the crossfire? Or if the entities spread beyond the warband? We're not gambling with the continuum. Send the order. Neutralize the original intruder. Contain the secondary breach. No survivors if it ensures stability. McCroyce hesitated, then nodded. I'll signal Trajan. But Alara, this feels wrong. Trajan's good, but they're human. Sending them against a pack of Beta-9 entities with a 3-day kit? It's a death sentence. Voss's expression didn't waver. They knew the risks. We all do. In the Tamar Valley, Trajan crouched atop a rocky outcrop, the Leshy 3 suit blending with the moss-covered stone. The night vision scope of their Remington M700 swept the forest below, its PSI scanner flickering with erratic signatures. The original target, the PSI wielder, was dead, their skulls shattered by a single shot at dawn. But the new signatures, pulsing like heartbeats in the scope, was something else. Not human, not even close. They moved in bursts, too fast, leaving no tracks, only faint distortions in the air. Trajan's earpiece crackled, Voss's voice cutting through. Trajan, new orders. Secondary breach confirmed. Multiple entities, Beta-9 origin. Lethal, unstable. Neutralize them alongside the primary target's allies. No restrictions on assets. Continuum stability is priority 1. Trajan's grip on the rifle tightened, their breath steady but their mind churning. Killing the mage had been clean. Necessary to prevent a timeline drift, but wiping out Branwyn's warband, now hunted by these creatures. That wasn't a mission, it was slaughter. They'd signed up to protect the continuum, not to erase innocence caught in its cracks. Understood, they said, their voice flat. Entity's behavior. Predatory, Voss replied. Drawn to PSI residue and human presence, they're targeting the warband, but they'll spread if not contained. You have 36 hours before your gear degrades. Move fast. Copy. Trajan cut the comm, their eyes scanning the forest. The warband was close, maybe a mile west, their campfires a faint glow through the trees. The entities were closer, their signatures flaring in the scope. Trajan's training screamed to follow orders, to eliminate all threats. But their gut, something human, something the order couldn't train out, rebelled. These Britons weren't the enemy. They were fighting for their lives. Same as Trajan. Auric led the way through the forest, his bow ready, Lyra at his side with her spear. Branwyn and Cillian followed, the boy's steps faltering, his eyes darting to every shadow. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the forest itself resented their presence. Lyra's presence grated on Auric. Her sharp tongue and sharper gaze made trust difficult, but she knew the terrain, and they needed every advantage. You're too tense, Hunter, Lyra said, her voice low as they navigated a gully. You'll snap that bowstring before you see the enemy. Auric's eyes flicked to her, his jaw tight. And you're too calm. Those things tore through your kin, and you're acting like it's a hunt for rabbits. Lyra's smirk faded, her grip tightening on her spear. I'm alive because I don't panic. You want to survive? Stop jumping at shadows. Enough, Branwyn growled from behind. We're exposed out here. Auric, how far to the cave? 1/4 mile, Auric said, his nose catching that burnt metal scent again, faint but persistent. The operative was near, or had been. But we're not alone. Something's watching. Cillian whimpered, clutching his dagger. The creatures again, or the one who killed the mage? Both, Auric said, his voice grim. He glanced at Lyra. You said you saw them. What are they? Lyra's eyes darkened. Like wolves, but not. They move like mist, strike without warning. I saw one rip through Edric's best warrior, like he was parchment, no bloodlust, just efficiency. Auric's stomach churned. Efficiency, like the operatives shot through the mage's skull. Were they connected? The cylinder in his pouch felt heavier, its symbols a puzzle he couldn't solve. "We stick to the plan," he said. "Reach the cave, regroup, then we hunt." Branwen nodded, but his eyes held doubt. "And if we can't fight them?" "The mage was our strength, Arik. Without him, we're not helpless," Lyra cut in, her voice sharp. "We've got steel, and we've got you, Hunter. Unless you're planning to run." Arik's temper flared, his hand twitching toward his bow. "Say that again, and you'll see how fast I hunt." Lyra stepped closer, her spear angled. "Try it, and you'll be dead before you draw." "Stop it!" Cillian's voice cracked, startling them. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "We're fighting each other while they're out there. The mage trusted you, Arik. Branwen, you're our leader. And you," he turned to Lyra, trembling, "you're all we've got. Stop acting like enemies." Arik exhaled, his anger cooling. The boy was right. They were fracturing, and the real threats, the operative, the creatures, were closing in. "Cillian's right," he said, meeting Lyra's gaze. "We work together, or we die alone." Lyra's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Fine. Lead on, Hunter." As they moved, the forest seemed to tighten around them, the air growing heavier. Arik's senses screamed. Danger was close, and it wasn't just the operative. Something else was out there, something that didn't belong in his world. And for the first time, he wondered if the forest, his lifelong ally, had turned against him. Chapter 7. The Veil's Truth. The cave at the Tamar's Bend was a damp, shadowed refuge, its walls slick with moss and echoing with the distant rush of the river. Arik crouched near the entrance, his bow drawn, eyes scanning the moonlit forest beyond. Lyra stood beside him, her spear gripped tightly, her breath steady, but her gaze restless. Branwen and Cillian huddled deeper inside, tending a small fire that cast flickering shadows across the stone. The air was heavy, not just with moisture, but with the same unnatural weight Arik had felt earlier, a sign the veil between worlds was fraying further. "They're coming," Arik whispered, his voice barely carrying over the river's murmur. The burnt metal scent of the operative lingered, mingling with a new, fouler stench, like rot and lightning. The creatures from the secondary breach were close, their PSI signatures pulsing in his hunter's senses, honed to feel the forest's pulse. But the operative was the greater threat. Arik's fingers brushed the cylinder in his pouch, its alien symbols a reminder of the mage's fate. Lyra's eyes flicked to him. "You're sure it's the same one? The one who killed the mage?" Arik nodded, his jaw tight. "Same scent, same tracks. They're human, Lyra. Not Orion, but something else. They move like a hunter, but better. Too precise. Human or not, they bleed," Lyra said, her voice hard. "We take them down. Then deal with those shadow wolves." Branwen's voice rumbled from the cave's depths. "If we survive. Cillian's barely holding together, and I'm no mage. Arik, Lyra, you're our edge. Don't waste it on bravado." Cillian looked up, his young face pale but resolute. "I can fight, Branwen. I'm not useless." "Nobody said you were," Arik said, his tone softer. "Stay sharp, stay alive. That's your job." A faint crack echoed through the forest, sharp and mechanical. Arik's heart leapt. He motioned for silence, his bow raised, arrow nocked. The operative. He crept forward, Lyra shadowing him, her spear low. The cave's mouth offered cover, but it also trapped them. If the operative struck now, or if the creatures attacked, they'd be cornered. The forest exploded into chaos. A shadow lunged from the trees, not the operative, but one of the creatures, formless, like smoke-given claws, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. It tore toward the cave, faster than any wolf. Arik loosed his arrow, the shaft sinking into the creature's flank, but it barely slowed, its form rippling as if the arrow were a pebble in a stream. Lyra thrust her spear, catching it in what might have been a shoulder. The creature shrieked, a sound that clawed at Arik's mind, and dissolved into mist, leaving only a scorch mark on the ground. "Gods!" Lyra gasped, her spear trembling. "What are they?" Before Arik could answer, a second creature lunged, then a third. He fired again, his arrow passing through one as if it were air. Lyra swung her spear, forcing another back, but the creatures circled, their forms flickering. Branwen charged from the cave, his sword slashing, while Cillian hurled a rock, his aim surprisingly true. The creatures recoiled, but their numbers grew, 5 now, their PSI signatures overwhelming. A sharp crack split the air, and one creature's head exploded, its body collapsing into ash. Arik spun, his bow tracking the sound. There, on a ridge above the cave, stood the operative, cloaked in their Leshy 3 suit, rifle raised, its barrel glinting faintly in the moonlight. Another shot, another creature down. The operative's movements were precise, mechanical, each bullet finding its mark. "Get down!" Arik shouted, pulling Lyra behind a boulder. Branwen and Cillian ducked back into the cave as the operative fired again, felling a third creature. The remaining 2 scattered, their forms dissolving into the trees. Arik's eyes locked on the operative. This was his chance. He rose, arrow nocked, aiming for the figure's chest, but the operative's rifle swung toward him, their eyes meeting through the night vision scope. Arik froze, the weight of that gaze like a blade at his throat. Human eyes, sharp and calculating, but carrying a weariness he hadn't expected. "Don't," the operative said, their voice low, carrying a strange accent, not Orion, not Briton. "I'm not your enemy." Arik's fingers tightened on the bowstring. "You killed the mage. You brought these things." The operative lowered their rifle slightly, but their stance remained ready. "The mage was tearing your world apart. I stopped him. Those creatures, they followed his breach. I'm trying to fix this." Lyra stepped forward, her spear raised. "Fix it? By killing us? Who are you?" The operative's gaze flicked to her, then back to Arik. "Name's Trajan. I'm a warden, from a place you wouldn't understand. My job is to keep your world from unraveling." Arik's mind raced, the cylinder's symbols flashing in his memory. "You're not Orion. Those marks on your weapon, they're like theirs, but different. Where are you from?" Trajan hesitated, their eyes softening for a moment. "A world beyond the veil, where time bends, where choices ripple. The mage came from there, too, but he was reckless. He wanted to save you, but he'd have destroyed everything." Branwen emerged from the cave, sword in hand. "You expect us to believe you? After what you've done?" Trajan's rifle snapped up, but they didn't fire. "Believe what you want. Those creatures, Beta 9 entities, they'll keep coming unless I seal the breach. Help me, or stay out of my way." Arik lowered his bow, not out of trust but necessity. The creatures were the immediate threat, and Trajan's weapon had felled them where his arrows failed. "Why should we help you?" he asked, his voice steady. "Because I'm all you've got," Trajan said. "My gear's failing. 30 hours, maybe less. After that, I'm as dead as you if those things spread." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "And when the creatures are gone, you turn that weapon on us?" Trajan's jaw tightened. "If I have to. My orders are clear. Stabilize the continuum, but I'd rather not kill you. Not if you help me." Arik glanced at Lyra, then Branwen. Cillian peeked from the cave, his face a mix of fear and defiance. The forest was silent now, but the weight of the veil pressed harder, a storm waiting to break. Trajan was a killer, but they were also a hunter, like Arik, and hunters knew when to ally, even with enemies. "Show us the breach," Arik said, his voice firm. "If you're telling the truth, we'll help. If not, I'll put an arrow through your heart." Trajan nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing their lips. "Fair enough, hunter. Follow me." As they moved into the forest, Auric's senses screamed. The Shadow Veil, Trajan's world, was no myth. It was real, and it was bleeding into his own. The truth was sharper than any blade, and it cut deeper than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 8. The Continuum's Price. The Tamar Valley was silent as dawn broke, its mist curling over the river like a shroud. Auric stood at the edge of the cave, his bow slung across his back, the cylinder still heavy in his pouch. The forest bore scars of the night's battle, scorched earth where the Beta 9 creatures had fallen, trees splintered by Trajan's explosives. The breach was sealed, or so Trajan claimed, after they'd led Auric, Lyra, Branwen, and Cillian to a clearing where the air shimmered with unnatural light. Trajan had planted a device, a small, humming orb that pulsed once, then dissolved, taking the oppressive weight of the veil with it. The creatures had vanished, their PSI signatures fading into nothing. But the cost was etched in Auric's mind. 2 more of Branwen's warriors had fallen in the chaos, their bodies torn by the shadow wolves before Trajan's rifle could end them. Lyra had taken a claw to her shoulder, her arm now bound in cloth, her face grim but unyielding. Cillian, miraculously, had survived, his dagger bloodied from a desperate strike. Branwen stood apart, his gaze distant, mourning not just his men, but the world he no longer understood. Trajan sat on a rock, their Leshy 3 suit tattered, their rifle resting across their knees. The weapon was nearly spent, its ammunition degrading as they'd warned. 30 hours, they'd said, and the dawn marked the end of that window. Their face, still streaked with paint, was weary, human in a way Auric hadn't expected. "It's done," Trajan said, their voice hoarse. "The breach is closed. Your world's safe for now." Auric's hand rested on his bow, his eyes never leaving Trajan. "Safe? You killed our mage, brought those things here. You call that safe?" Trajan's gaze met his, unflinching. "The mage was the breach, hunter. His power tore the veil. I stopped him to save your timeline. The creatures were a consequence, not my doing." Lyra stepped forward, her spear leaning against her good shoulder. "And us? Were we just collateral? Your orders would have had us dead too." Trajan's jaw tightened, but they didn't look away. "Orders are orders, but I chose to work with you. That's why you're standing here." Branwen's voice cut through, low and heavy. "You're no Orion, Trajan, but you're no friend either. What's to stop us killing you now?" Trajan's hand rested on their pistol, but they didn't draw. "Nothing, except I'm out of time. My gear's failing, my way back's gone. Kill me, and you lose nothing, but I'd rather walk away." Auric's fingers twitched, the memory of the mage's shattered skull vivid. Trust was a blade's edge, but Trajan had fought beside them, saved them from the creatures. "Where will you go?" he asked. Trajan shrugged, a ghost of a smile on their lips. "The forest's big. I'm a hunter. Like you. I'll manage." Cillian, his voice steadier now, spoke up. "What about the veil? Will it break again?" Trajan's smile faded. "Maybe. Your world's fragile, kid. The mage wasn't the first to cross, won't be the last. My people, my order, will keep watching, but you, live your lives. Fight your wars. Just don't tear the world apart doing it." Auric exchanged glances with Lyra and Branwen. The chieftain nodded, a silent agreement. Trajan stood, slinging their rifle over their shoulder, and walked into the forest without looking back. Auric watched until the trees swallowed them, the burnt metal scent fading with their steps. "What now?" Lyra asked, her voice softer. The fight drained from her. Auric looked to the river, its waters glinting in the dawn. "We rebuild. The Orions are still coming. We fight them, not shadows." Branwen's eyes hardened. "And if more come from this veil?" Arik's hand closed around the cylinder in his pouch. Then we learn. We hunt. Beneath Tintagel, the command chamber was quiet, the red alerts replaced by steady green pulses. Commander Alara Voss reviewed the final report, her face unreadable. The holographic map showed the Tamar Valley, the breach signatures gone, the continuum stabilized at a 2.93% deviation, within acceptable limits. Professor McCroyce stood beside her, his voice subdued. Trajan's report came through before their gear failed. The intruder's dead, the secondary breach sealed. Warbands reduced, but Branwyn's alive. Timelines intact. Voss nodded, her eyes on the data. And Trajan? Presumed lost, McCroyce said, his tone heavy. No extraction per protocol. Their files archived. Hero of reality, posthumous. Family's been notified. Voss's lips pressed into a thin line. They knew the cost. We all do. McCroyce hesitated, then spoke. Alara, the secondary breach, it wasn't random. The shadow veil's unstable, more than we thought. If another mage crosses, then we act again, Voss cut in, her voice steel. The continuum holds. That's what matters. McCroyce nodded, but his eyes lingered on the map, on the faint ripple where the Tamar Valley lay. The continuum was safe, but for how long? Arik stood on a hill overlooking the valley, the cylinder in his hand. Lyra joined him, her wound bandaged, her spear at her side. You keeping that thing? She asked. Arik turned it over, its symbols catching the light. A reminder, he said, of what's out there, of what we can't see. Lyra's gaze softened. You think Trajan was right? About our world being fragile? Arik didn't answer right away. He thought of Torvin, of the forest's lessons, of the veil that had nearly swallowed them. He thought of Trajan, a hunter like him, lost to a world he'd never understand. Maybe, he said finally. But fragile or not, it's ours. We'll fight for it. He tucked the cylinder away and turned to the horizon, where the Orion banners would soon rise. The forest was his home, his shield, but also a battleground, and Arik, hunter of the Britons, would be ready. Thank you for listening to my story to the end. Share your opinion in the comments. What do you think about it? If you liked this story, do not forget to share it with your friends and like it. And if you are new to the channel, then be sure to turn on notifications because there are many more amazing stories ahead of you.